A canine German shepherd mother was beaten until she went blind. A soldier saved her and her puppies. She was once a proud canine trained to serve and protect, but after being discarded like trash, she endured the unthinkable, beaten, starved, and left for dead, blind and broken. All she had left were her tiny puppies and a will to protect them at any cost. Everyone had given up on her, everyone but him. When a battle-scarred soldier stumbled upon this helpless mother in her litter, something inside him shifted. He saw in her pain a reflection of his own. What happens next is a story you'll never forget, a journey of survival, redemption, and the healing power of love between a man and a dog who had both lost everything. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss a single one of our powerful stories that celebrate courage, loyalty, and second chances. The sun was setting over the outskirts of a small rural town in Alabama. Dust rose in the air as a pickup truck rattled down a deserted dirt road, the engine growling like it resented every turn of its wheels. Inside the truck bed, a cage sat wedged between rusty tools and a cracked water jug. It wasn't empty. Curled tightly in the corner of that cage was a female German shepherd, her once glorious black and tan coat now matted with filth and dry blood. Her breathing was shallow, every inhale a struggle. She didn't lift her head when the truck stopped. She didn't flinch when the engine cut off. She didn't have the strength. Her name had once been Luna, a name spoken proudly by the officer who had trained her. She'd served as AK-9 on military bases overseas, sniffing out danger and protecting lives. But when her handler was killed in combat, Luna was discharged and reclassified as unfit. She passed through 2 shelters and was then adopted by a man who saw her as nothing more than a tool. When she didn't obey fast enough, he punished her. When she tried to protect her newborn pups, he hit her harder. Eventually, she couldn't see anymore, not because of age or illness, but because his fists had taken the light from her world. Now she lay motionless, for tiny pups nestled against her, whimpering and blind to the horrors they'd been born into. Luna didn't know how much longer she could keep them warm. She didn't even know where they were being taken. She only knew pain, silence, and darkness. Miles away, Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks was sitting alone on the front steps of his modest cabin. It had been 5 months since his last deployment, and yet the desert dust still clung to his boots. His right leg ached from shrapnel that hadn't healed right. But worse than the physical pain was quiet, a quiet that echoed louder than any gunfire. He'd served 3 tours, lost friends, and lost pieces of himself. The military had been his purpose, his anchor. But now that he was home, the world felt empty. He'd come to the cabin to escape the noise of the city, the fake smiles, and the thank you for your service nods that didn't really mean anything. He ran a hand through his short-cropped hair and stood, looking out at the tree line. Something didn't feel right. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Back on the dirt road, the truck pulled into a clearing surrounded by rusted metal and broken-down farm equipment. The driver, a large man with tobacco-stained teeth, kicked open the truck bed and yanked the cage onto the ground. Luna's body jerked from the impact. Her pup squealed. Useless mud, the man spat. Ain't even worth the bullet. He turned and walked toward the shed, grabbing a shovel from the wall. That's when Luna stirred, blind, weak, and bleeding. She pulled her fragile body over her puppies, baring her teeth to the darkness. She couldn't see the threat, but she felt it. And even if her body failed her, her instinct would not. The man returned, shovel in hand. Time to finish it. But before he could raise it, a voice rang out from the edge of the woods. "Hey, put that down." The man froze. Daniel Brooks stepped into the clearing, his military boots silent on the leaves. His eyes scanned the scene, an injured dog, blood in the dirt, for trembling puppies, and a man with shovel mid-swing. "What the hell are you doing?" Daniel's voice was calm, cold. "None of your business." "Soldier boy," the man grunted, "just getting rid of a problem." Daniel's hand slowly reached for the sidearm he kept holstered under his jacket. "Walk away," he said. "Right now, or the next thing you bury won't be a dog." The man locked eyes with Daniel for a long second, then dropped the shovel with a clang and muttered something under his breath as he stormed off into the woods. Daniel waited until the man disappeared, then crouched beside the cage. Hey, there, girl, he whispered. It's okay now. You're safe. Luna didn't move. She couldn't see the man kneeling beside her, couldn't tell if this was another cruel voice or something different. But when Daniel reached in and gently touched her paw, she didn't growl. She just trembled. Then one of the puppies squeaked and tried to climb over her. Daniel's chest tightened. You've been through hell, haven't you? He didn't know yet how deep her scars ran, or that this broken dog would change everything about his life. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't leaving her there. Daniel stood in silence for a long moment, staring at the broken mother and her puppies. The night air wrapped around them like a heavy blanket, filled with the soft whimpers of the pups and the creaking of the trees overhead. Luna still hadn't moved, her breathing shallow and strained. The cage smelled of rot, old blood, and fear. Daniel didn't hesitate. He pulled out his knife and cut through the rusted latch. The door creaked open, and the moment his hand reached inside, Luna flinched. Her ears flattened, her teeth barely visible. She was blind, but she could still smell the world, feel its danger, its cruelty. I'm not going to hurt you, Daniel whispered, crouching low and keeping his voice steady. I swear, girl, I'm here to help. Slowly, he wrapped his arms around her fragile body. Her ribs jutted out like jagged branches, her fur sticky, and he could feel scabs beneath the matted hair. Her head dropped against his chest, not from trust, but from sheer exhaustion. He gently lifted her out of the cage, then reached back for the pups. They were barely bigger than his hand, their eyes still closed, their soft whimpers pulled at something deep in his chest. Daniel carried them all to his truck, placing Luna on a folded blanket in the back seat. He lined a cardboard box with an old hoodie and tucked the puppies in, setting them next to her so she could feel them close. She nudged them weakly, her nose brushing over their warm little bodies. He started the engine, and the truck rumbled down the road. Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror. Luna didn't move. She just lay there, guarding her pups with what little life remained in her. His knuckles tightened on the wheel. You don't deserve this, he muttered under his breath. None of you do. The drive back to his cabin felt longer than usual. The weight in the truck wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Memories flooded back, memories he thought he'd buried for good. The night his unit was ambushed, the sound of the explosion, the blood, the silence that followed. The body of his best friend, Marcus, motionless beside him. Marcus had a dog, Rex, a tough, stubborn German shepherd who wouldn't leave his side. Rex had pulled Daniel out of the rubble, dragged him through enemy fire, saved his life, and then vanished during the chaos. Daniel never found him. But now, in the backseat of his truck, was another German shepherd, a mother who had fought through hell to keep her puppies alive. He didn't know why, but it felt like something had come full circle when he pulled up to the cabin. The porch light flickered to life. He stepped out, gently opened the back door, and reached for Luna again. You're home now, he murmured. He carried her inside, straight to the warm living room where the fireplace still glowed with embers. He laid her down on a thick comforter and placed the puppies beside her. She whimpered low and raspy. Daniel rushed to the kitchen, grabbing a bowl and filling it with lukewarm water. When he placed it near her head, she sniffed it, then licked slowly, cautiously. It was the first thing she'd accepted. Good girl, he said softly. He grabbed another bowl and filled it with soft shredded chicken from the fridge. She didn't touch it first, but when one of the pups squirmed closer, she weakly pulled the food toward her and ate slowly, one painful bite at a time. Daniel knelt beside her, watching her every move. She's a fighter, he whispered to himself. But the truth was, Luna didn't have much time. He could see it in her body, in the way she moved. Every motion drained her. Her wounds were infected, and she needed a vet now. Daniel stood up, grabbed his keys again, and threw on his jacket. I'll be right back, he said. Don't give up on me. He rushed to his truck and took off down the road toward the only 24-hour veterinary clinic in the county, nearly 45 minutes away. Back at the cabin, the fire crackled. Luna lay still, her head resting near her pups. Her ears twitched at every sound. Even though she couldn't see, her body remained curled protectively around her babies. But outside, someone was watching. Just beyond the edge of the woods, A pair of headlights blinked off. The man with the shovel hadn't gone far, and he wasn't done yet. The old truck roared down the dark highway, headlights cutting through the fog, as Daniel gripped the steering wheel like his life depended on it. But it wasn't his life he was worried about tonight. It was hers. Luna lay in the back seat, her breathing uneven, her muzzle twitching with every bump in the road. The puppies were tucked safely in a crate beside her, bundled in a blanket, their tiny bodies huddled close for warmth. Daniel kept glancing at them through the mirror, his heart pounding. He'd seen death before on battlefields, in the eyes of fallen comrades. But this was different. This felt personal. The clinic came into view, a white building at the edge of town with a glowing red neon sign that read 24-hour animal care. He skidded into the gravel parking lot, slammed the gear into park, and bolted around to the back seat. "I've got you," he whispered, lifting Luna gently in his arms. Her body was limp, but her ears twitched at his voice. She was holding on, barely. The front doors burst open as Daniel rushed in, shouting over the counter, "I need help now. She's in bad shape. She's blind, bleeding, and just gave birth." A young vet jumped from her seat. "Bring her here, fast." He laid Luna on a table in the emergency exam room. The puppies were taken by another assistant, who quickly began warming them under a heat lamp. Daniel stood frozen, helpless, as the vet examined Luna's body. "Old wounds, recent trauma. She's severely malnourished," the vet murmured, shining a light into Luna's unseeing eyes. "And these are trauma-induced cataracts. Someone did this to her." Daniel clenched his jaw. "I know who." The vet looked at him. "She doesn't have much time. She needs fluids, antibiotics, and we'll have to clean these wounds right away. But even if we stabilize her, she may never regain her sight." Daniel nodded slowly. "Just do everything you can. She's been through too much to die now." The vet nodded and turned back to work. While they treated Luna, Daniel sat beside the puppies. Their eyes were still closed, but they squirmed in the box, instinctively moving toward each other. One of them stretched out a tiny paw and rested on his wrist. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't felt something like this in years. It was warmth, life, purpose. 45 minutes passed like a blur. Then the vet stepped out of the room. "She's stable. We stopped the bleeding, cleaned her wounds, and she's getting fluids now," she said. "But she's going to need long-term care, and recovery will be slow." "I'll take care of her," Daniel replied without hesitation. "She's not going back to where I found her." The vet hesitated. "And the man who did this?" Daniel looked her dead in the eye. "He won't touch her again." As dawn broke over the horizon, Daniel loaded Luna and the pups back into the truck. She was still weak, but now her breathing had steadied. Her head rested lightly on the edge of the seat, and the pups curled up against her stomach. The ride home was quiet, peaceful. But back at the cabin, peace was about to shatter. Unbeknownst to Daniel, the man he confronted, the one with the shovel, had returned during the night. His muddy truck was parked just beyond the tree line, hidden behind a fallen oak. He was watching, waiting. A cigarette dangled from his lips as he stared through binoculars at the empty cabin. When he saw the truck pull up in the early morning light, he crushed the cigarette under his boot and stepped back into the shadows. Inside the cabin, Daniel carried Luna to the same soft spot by the fire. He laid her down gently and positioned the crate of puppies next to her. Her ears perked up slightly as one of the pups squeaked and pressed against her. Though she couldn't see them, she felt them. She knew they were safe. Daniel knelt beside her and brushed her fur with a warm, damp towel. "You made it, girl," he whispered. "You're safe now." Luna let out a soft, raspy breath. She believed him. But outside, in the woods behind the cabin, a pair of muddy boots crept closer, one careful step at a time. He wasn't finished. The cabin was quiet, except for the gentle crackle of the fire and the soft squeaks of nursing puppies. Daniel stood at the kitchen counter, pouring hot coffee into a dented metal mug. Daniel hadn't slept, not really. His body was exhausted, but his mind was running on adrenaline and instinct, something the Army had trained into him. And the memory of the man's face, the rage in his eyes, the shovel in his hand. He knew men like that. The kind who didn't care who they hurt. Animals, people. It was all the same to them. And that man didn't seem like the kind to walk away quietly. Daniel took a sip of his coffee and looked toward the living room. Luna was curled on the blanket, her head resting protectively near her puppies. Though her eyes were clouded, she turned her ears at every sound, always alert, always aware. She was blind, but far from helpless. And Daniel was learning that her strength ran deeper than anything he'd expected. He sat on the floor next to her, gently stroking the space behind her ears. "You've got some fight left in you," he murmured. "So do I." Outside, the first light of morning filtered through the pine trees, but among those trees, something moved. Boots crunched against fallen twigs. A shadow passed behind the woodshed. The man had returned. He moved slowly, deliberately, wearing a faded hoodie and carrying a crowbar. His eyes scanned the back of the cabin, lips curled into a sneer. This time, he wasn't just here to finish off a dog. He was angry, embarrassed, and people like him didn't forget humiliation easily. He crept toward the side window, crouching low. Through the glass, he could just barely see inside, the dog lying by the fire, the soldier nearby. Too easy. Back inside, Luna stirred suddenly. Her body tensed. Her ears shot up, facing the window. A low growl rumbled deep in her chest, a warning that something wasn't right. Daniel looked at her. "What is it?" She growled again, louder. He stood alert now, his senses sharpening. Luna hadn't made a sound like that since the night he found her. This was different, primal. He grabbed the flashlight and stepped toward the back door. But before he could open it, glass shattered. The side window exploded inward, shards flying across the living room. As the man shoved a crowbar through and began climbing inside, Daniel spun around, instinct kicking in. "Luna, stay." But Luna didn't stay. She leapt up, staggering at first, but then charging forward, teeth bared, a force of instinct and rage. Blind, battered, bleeding, but not broken. The man barely made it through the window before Luna was on him. She crashed into his arm, clamping down hard what strength she had left. He screamed, swinging the crowbar wildly, trying to shake her off. "Drop it now," Daniel shouted, gun drawn. The man froze, Luna still hanging from his arm, growling with all the fire the warrior she once was. "I said drop it." The crowbar clanged to the floor. Daniel grabbed the man and yanked him to the ground, knees on his back, weapon pressed to his neck. "You made a big mistake coming back here." Blood from Luna's mouth dripped onto the floor as she finally released him, panting hard. Her legs shook. She collapsed beside the wall, ears twitching toward the puppy's cries from the corner of the room. Daniel cuffed the man's hands behind his back with zip ties and called the sheriff on his satellite phone. "He broke into my house and tried to harm my dog, and he's already got history. You'd better get here fast." The sheriff promised a quick response. Daniel turned back to Luna. She lay motionless, chest heaving, blood on her muzzle and one paw. But she was alive. The puppies crawled toward her, and she lifted her head just enough to nudge them close. "You saved us," Daniel whispered, kneeling beside her. She let out a soft, raspy bark. Just one. The fight wasn't over, but tonight she had won. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance. The sheriff's truck pulled up just after sunrise, tires crunching against the gravel. 2 deputies stepped out. Daniel stood on the porch, arms crossed, jaw set. The man who'd broken into his cabin was zip-tied on the ground, mumbling curses under his breath, with a bloodied sleeve and swollen wrist. Inside, Luna lay weak but alive, her head resting protectively against her puppies. One of the deputies walked up to Daniel and nodded. "We've had complaint about him before. Animal cruelty, assault, but no one ever had enough to press charges. You may have just changed that." "He won't hurt her again," Daniel said firmly. After giving his statement, Daniel returned inside. The fire was still going, and the smell of coffee and pine filled the room. He knelt beside Luna and gently brushed his fingers through her fur. Her eyes remained cloudy, but they followed the sound of his voice. "You did good, girl," he whispered. "You didn't just survive. You protected your family." The puppies nestled closer to her chest, their tiny tails twitching as they fed. Luna let out a soft breath, a sign of peace, of safety. That afternoon, Daniel drove her back to the vet for a second evaluation, this time to check for long-term damage and any hope for her eyesight. While the vet examined her in the back room, Daniel sat in the waiting area, tapping his fingers on the armrest, mind racing. A few minutes later, the vet came out, holding a microchip scanner in her hand. "She's got a chip," the vet said. It was still active. "I ran it through the National Canine Database, and Daniel, this dog isn't just any dog." Daniel stood. "What do you mean?" The vet handed him a printout. "Her name is Vera. She served with Marine K 9 unit overseas. Honorable discharge after a handler, Lieutenant Sam Bishop, was killed in action 2 years ago. She was sent back to the U.S. but got lost in the system. No one followed up." Daniel stared at the paper. The name Bishop wasn't just a name he recognized. It was someone he had met once, briefly, during a training op in Qatar. A quiet, calm Marine with a deep respect for his dog. He used to talk about her like she was his sister, not just his partner. "She was one of the best," the vet continued. "And when she came back, she should have gone to a retirement program or stayed with someone in his family. But something went wrong." Daniel ran a hand over his face, overwhelmed. "Vera, not Luna," he muttered. The name hit different. Vera wasn't just a survivor. She was a hero. She had served, fought, saved lives, and after all that, the system failed her. Daniel looked at the vet. Can she ever get her vision back? The vet hesitated. "There's a chance cataract surgery might restore some vision, but it's expensive and risky, given her condition. But with care, she can live a long, pain-free life. She just needs someone to fight for her now." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Then I will." That night, back at the cabin, Daniel held Vera's head gently in his hands. She couldn't see him, but her ears moved with every sound he made. "Your name is Vera," he whispered. "You've been through war, through hell, through abandonment, but not anymore. This is your home now. I don't care what it costs. I'll get you that surgery. You deserve to see your babies. You deserve everything." She let out a soft sound, a quiet, contented hum, the kind that said she understood. And Daniel, for the first time in years, felt whole. Outside the cabin, snow began to fall lightly, coating the ground in a fresh white blanket. The world was still quiet, healing, but deep inside Daniel's chest, something stirred, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since the battlefield. He hadn't just saved Vera. She had saved him, too. The next morning, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, laptop open, fingers paused over the keyboard. The vet had given him the contact information for a specialized animal ophthalmologist in Georgia. The surgery to restore Vera's vision wasn't impossible, but the cost was steep, $5, $200 up front, plus travel and post-op care. Daniel exhaled hard. He'd saved up some money from his military disability payments, but it wasn't enough, not even close. He glanced over at Vera, sleeping peacefully on the living room rug, with her pups nestled around her. She looked better already. Her breathing was steadier, her body not as tense. She was healing, and he couldn't let her down. He started typing a crowdfunding campaign. He hated asking for help, but this wasn't about him. This was about a dog who had served, been abandoned, beaten, and still found the strength to protect others. He wrote from the heart. She served our country. She lost her partner. She lost her sight. And still, she protected her babies with every ounce of strength left in her. Now she needs us. Help Vera see the world again, because she never gave up on us. He clicked post and leaned back, staring out the window. Snow was falling again, light and steady. The world looked peaceful, but his mind was racing. Later that afternoon, as he was bringing in firewood, he heard a vehicle approach. Not the sheriff this time. No sirens, no gravel flying. Just a quiet black SUV that pulled up to the edge of the property and stopped. Daniel tensed. He set the wood down slowly and stepped forward. A tall man stepped out of the car, early 40s, broad shoulders, wearing a military jacket with a faded Marine Corps insignia. His hair was buzz close, but there was a softness in his eyes. Staff Sergeant Brooks? The man asked. That's me. Who's asking? The man extended his hand. Name's Captain Eli Harper. I serve with Lieutenant Sam Bishop, Vera's former handler. Daniel didn't speak. He just stared at the man, stunned. I saw your post, Harper continued. A buddy forwarded it to me this morning. When I read it, I had to come. Daniel shook his hand, still processing. You knew her? I trained with her, Harper said, glancing toward the house. Back when she was a pup, watched her take down her first target overseas. She was fearless, loyal to a fault. And when Sam was killed, well, she changed, didn't eat, didn't bark. We thought she'd never work again. The higher-ups decided to ship her stateside, said she was unfit. I tried to keep her. I offered to adopt her, but paperwork got screwed up. Then she vanished. She didn't vanish, Daniel said quietly. She was dumped, abused, beaten so badly she went blind. Harper's jaw clenched. Damn. Daniel led him inside. When Harper saw Vera, his expression cracked. He knelt down, barely breathing. Vera, girl, he whispered. She lifted her head, ears twitching. The scent hit her nose like a ghost from another life. Her tail gave a slow, tentative thump. That's right, Harper whispered, his voice breaking. You remember? Vera nudged forward until her nose touched his hand. She let out a soft, whimpering sound. Not fear, not pain, something else. Recognition. I thought I lost you, Harper whispered. Daniel gave him a moment. Then Harper stood, brushing his eyes. I've got money, he said, pulling out his phone. Whatever you need for the surgery, it's yours. She saved lives. She gave everything. And now it's our turn. Daniel hesitated. I don't know what to say. Say you'll let me help, Harper said. Say you'll let her live the life she deserves. Daniel nodded. We're doing the surgery. That night, as the snow thickened outside, Vera slept, surrounded by warmth, love, and something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Her future was no longer darkness. It was finally beginning to glow. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, Daniel's phone buzzed with a message. Unknown number. You think it's over. You think you won. Watch your back, soldier. Daniel's smile faded. His hand tightened around the phone. Not everyone was ready to let Vera go. The snow kept falling as Daniel paced outside the animal surgery center, hands buried deep in his jacket pockets, his breath fogging in the cold air. Inside, behind a set of steel doors, Vera was in surgery. It had been 2 hours. Captain Harper sat silently on a bench nearby, his eyes fixed on the door, unmoving. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the message. Someone was still out there, still watching. But that could wait. Right now, nothing mattered more than whether Vera would wake up, and if she'd ever see again. When Yvette finally emerged, mask lowered, her eyes were tired but soft. She made it, she said, and there's good news. The cataracts are gone. Her vision may not be perfect, but she'll see again. Daniel exhaled, eyes burning. Harper stood and looked toward the room. When can we see her? Soon, the vet smiled. But be gentle. The light might overwhelm her at first. Later that evening, Daniel entered the recovery room. Vera lay on a soft mat, wrapped in a blanket. Her head lifted slowly at the sound of his boots. Her eyes blinked for the first time. They were no longer cloudy, but wide, focused, curious. He crouched in front of her, barely whispering, "Hey, girl." She looked straight at him, not just toward his voice, but at him directly. Her tail moved once, then again. Her ears perked. Daniel's chest tightened as she slowly pushed herself forward and pressed her face against his. She could see him, and somehow it felt like she always had. Back at the cabin, the puppies had grown stronger, playful and healthy. Captain Harper helped set up a proper pen, and even offered to adopt one of them. Vera now moved confidently through the house, no longer guessing, no longer hiding. But Daniel wasn't done yet. He gave the authorities a threatening message, and with Harper's help, it didn't take long to trace the sender. The man who had hurt Vera was arrested again, this time with real charges, real consequences. He wouldn't be coming back. Winter passed. Spring bloomed. Vera would never return to the battlefield, but she had a new mission now. She watched over Daniel, over the man, over her babies. She was no longer a broken K9. She was a mother, a survivor, a symbol of what it means to fight and win. And Daniel, he wasn't alone anymore. He had her, and she had him, forever. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, share it with someone who loves powerful stories of courage and redemption, and help us honor the loyalty of K9 heroes like Vera, who never stop protecting, even after the war is over.